Today we are making the Celeste Frock. It's a knit dress with two different options for the front construction. Please read through the Read First file. It has all the information that you need, and feel free to follow along with the photo instructions I've included. And now let's get sewing. You will need knit fabric with a 4-way stretch. You need at least 50 to 70% stretch along the cross grain and at least 30 to 70% stretch along the grain. Any more than that will most likely require you to size down, and any less than that and you'll have to size up and possibly widen the neck opening. To test your stretch, place your pre-shrunken fabric in front of a ruler. I am testing the cross grain, which is perpendicular to the selvage. Place your hand at 0 and grab the fabric at 10 and stretch. The amount you stretch to is your percentage, so 15 will be 50%, 16 would be 60%, and you get the idea. Do the exact same thing for the grain direction and always do a 12 first to ensure that the fit is to your liking. Seam allowance is included, 1/4 inch or 6mm in all seams, and hems have no allowance as they are to be finished with a lettuce hem. If you don't have an overlocker, I suggest adding an extra 1/8 to the perimeter of each pattern piece, excluding the fold areas of course, so that you can sew with a 3/8 of an inch or a 1 centimeter seam allowance. We're going to start the construction with the front. So for style A, we're going to take the upper and lower panel, and we are going to place them wrong sides together, pinning first at the center notch, then the outer edges, and then filling in the rest of the gap as we go. I like to use clips instead of pins, particularly for overlocking, just because they're so much easier to take off and I don't run the risk of sewing over a pin and dulling my blade on my overlocker. So clips are really great and they're lots of fun too. Style B is a little bit different. So we're going to start with the actual pattern pieces. So you're going to cut out the facing piece of piece 7 first. And then for the full outer piece of the bottom half of the front, we're going to tape piece 7 to piece 2 at the dotted line. This will be your full piece, and then you can cut out your full outer piece. Place your shell and facing right sides together. Mark the center of your elastic lengths, which you can find on page 7 of the Read First file, and then place the elastic at the center notch of each curved seam and pin in place. I also like to pin away from the seam as well to keep the 2 layers in place while I sew. Then I'm going to overlock this area without stretching and try not to cut the elastic as you go. It's not the end of the world if you cut the elastic, but it just keeps the integrity of the elastic if you don't cut into it. After that's done, turn your construction out and understitch on the facing side with a zigzag stitch. So that means that you're going to be stitching the seam to the facing. Again, try not to stretch as you sew. Stretching will only promote gaping, so definitely try not to stretch. Now this is optional, but if you want to add the overlock stitch on top of all this, you can turn everything out and then stitch along this seam line. Just be careful not to cut into the finished seam. To complete the front keyhole of style B, locate the notch closest to the opening on both the top and bottom pieces. These notches must align as you overlap the top and bottom. Clip them together and then sew in place. I like to use a basting stitch because it helps me not stretch this area. Next, we are going to apply the assembled front to the back with wrong sides facing and overlock the shoulder seams and the side seams. Now we are moving on to the sleeves. Pin those sleeve seams with wrong sides together, And just note that the sleeve will seem to twist when the seam is laying flat, and that's because the seam curves from the back of the arm to the front. So the back side of the seam is cut at a slightly different angle from the front side, so it will seem a bit longer, but just make sure you ease it all in, and the stretchiness of this fabric is so forgiving and so helpful with easing things in. Apply the finished sleeves to the armhole with wrong sides facing. You're going to match the sleeve notch at the underarm to the side seam, the notch at the cap to the shoulder seam, the single notch to the front, and the double notch to the back armhole. Start and end at the side seam so that the overlap stitch is not seen. And you may also want to know how to have a flush overlapped overlock stitch. So you want to hold out the tail that you started it with as you sew and cut it off as you're sewing, then sew a few more stitches without cutting the edge of the original stitches. Then stop, lift the foot and move the fabric to the back of the stitch. Put the foot back down and sew the tail. And this just gives a nice flush, neat edge. And I will show you later how to cut the tails so that they don't just unravel. Now it is time to sew the skirt. The skirt is very easy, it's just one long seam. So you want to start by matching the center back notches and the side seam notches to the side seam. And then pin the skirt notch on the front and the hem area, and then pin everywhere in between. Pinning notches first will help you place this stretchy fabric exactly where it needs to be instead of pinning from top to bottom and finding that one seems longer than the other. The two pieces are cut on different angles in some places, requiring you to ease it in at parts and stretch some parts just slightly to fit. So just make sure that you clip those notches and you will not have any trouble. And you are going to overlock this seam in one fell swoop. If you're finding that the seam is really ripply, again, I'm going to reiterate that you can increase your differential feed and that will really help you. At this point, I encourage you to try the dress on. Different fabrics will sit differently and may alter the hemline somewhat. You may find that it's longer due to the weight of the fabric, and in this case, you can either shorten or level unevenness before finishing the hems with an overlock stitch. To finish the raw hem on the overlock, decrease your differential feed to create a ripply lettuce hem and sew along the dress hem. Stretch the fabric gently as you feed it in. And just a tip, if you don't want to finish with an overlock stitch, knit fabric doesn't fray, so you can just cut it really cleanly, make sure that you reinforce the ends of seams with a back stitch, and then you're good to go. You don't even have to finish it. To safely cut overlocked tails, cut about an inch away from the seam or 2.5 centimeters away from the seam, and then just pull the thread tail. A longer tail will appear. Pull that one until you see the seam start to shrink, and then cut close to the seam to finish. There are other ways to finish, but that's just the quick and easy way I like to do it. And with that, your dress is complete. And before I show you the final result, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and like this video if you enjoyed it. And I would love to see what you made. Share it with me on Instagram, tag me at Lydia Naomi Studio, and hashtag Celeste Frock. Thanks for watching.
you.